The Williams family sat around the oak dining table, the clink of silverware against plates punctuating the soft hum of evening conversation. The dining room was warm, bathed in the golden glow of a chandelier that hung slightly off-center, casting delicate shadows on the floral wallpaper. The roast chicken, golden and fragrant, sat as the centerpiece, flanked by bowls of mashed potatoes and green beans glistening with butter. To an outsider it was the picture of suburban bliss, a family of 5 gathered for a Sunday dinner in their modest 2-story home on Maple Lane. But beneath the surface an unspoken tension coiled like a snake ready to strike. John Williams, the father, sat at the head of the table, his broad shoulders hunched as he carved thin slices of chicken with mechanical precision. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the plate in front of him, avoiding the gazes of his wife and children. At 42, John's once boyish charm had eroded into a weary handsomeness, his dark hair streaked with premature growth. He was a man who carried the weight of something unsaid, his fingers twitching slightly as he set the carving knife down. Across from him, his wife Emily pushed a lock of auburn hair behind her ear, her movements deliberate but shaky. She was 38, with sharp green eyes that darted toward the dining room window every few minutes, as if expecting someone to peer through the glass. Their 3 children filled the spaces between them. Ethan, 16, slouched in his chair, his hoodie sleeves pulled over his knuckles as he scrolled through his phone under the table. His dark eyes, so like his father's, flickered with teenage defiance. But there was something else there too, a weariness that didn't match his age. Beside him, 12-year-old Lily poked at her green beans, her blonde ponytail swinging as she leaned toward her brother to whisper something. Ethan ignored her, his thumb swiping faster across the screen. At the far end of the table in a high chair was 18-month-old Sophie. Her chubby cheeks flushed as she gummed a piece of soft carrot. Her tiny hands gripped the tray, and every few minutes she let out a sharp, piercing cry that made the room pause. "Sophie, sweetheart. It's okay," Emily said, her voice soft but strained as she reached over to stroke the baby's head. Sophie's cries subsided into a whimper, but her wide blue eyes stayed fixed on the window, unblinking as if she saw something the others didn't. Emily's hand lingered on the baby's curls, her fingers trembling slightly before she pulled away and forced a smile. "She's been fussy all day, probably teething," John grunted, not looking up from his plate. "She's fine, just laugh." His voice was gruff, clipped, the kind of tone that made Lily glance at her mother for reassurance. Emily's smile tightened, but she said nothing, her eyes flicking to the window again. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, the streetlights casting a soft glow on the row of identical houses. Maple Lane was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, where kids rode bikes until dusk and neighbors waved from porches. But tonight, the street felt too still, the air heavy with the promise of a storm. Lily broke the silence, her voice bright but tinged with unease. "Can I have more potatoes, Mom?" She held out her plate, her eyes darting between her parents. Emily nodded, scooping a generous portion from the bowl, but her movements were mechanical, her gaze distant. Lily frowned, her fork hovering over her plate. "Is something wrong?" "You guys are acting weird," Ethan snorted without looking up. "They're always weird. You just notice it now." His tone was sharp, but there was a flicker of concern in his eyes as he glanced at his father. John's fork paused mid-air, his knuckles whitening around the handle, but he didn't respond. Emily shot Ethan a warning look, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Enough, Ethan," she said quietly. "Eat your dinner." The room fell silent again, save for the soft clinking of plates and Sophie's occasional babbling. The baby's cries had stopped, but she was restless, her tiny hands smacking the tray as she stared at the window. Emily followed her daughter's gaze, her breath catching for a moment before she forced herself to look away. The curtains were drawn, but a sliver of darkness peeked through the gap, and for a moment she thought she saw a shadow move. Her heart thudded, but she shook her head, dismissing it as a trick of the light. John cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "I've got an early meeting tomorrow," he said, his voice flat. "Need to get some paperwork done tonight." He pushed his plate away, barely touched, and stood, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Emily's eyes followed him, a flicker of something, fear maybe, crossing her face before she masked it with a smile. "Already?" she asked, her voice too bright. "You didn't even finish your chicken." "I'm not hungry," John said, already halfway out of the room. He paused at the doorway, his back to the family, and for a moment it seemed like he might say something more, but then he was gone, his footsteps heavy on the stair. Emily stared at the empty doorway, her fingers twisting the napkin in her lap until the fabric frayed. Lily leaned toward Ethan, her voice barely a whisper. "What's wrong with Dad?" Ethan shrugged, but his eyes were on his mother now, watching the way her hands shook as she reached for her water glass. "Dunno, probably work stuff." But his tone lacked conviction, and he pocketed his phone, suddenly attentive. Sophie let out another sharp cry, her tiny body jerking in the high chair. Emily jumped, her water glass tipping over and spilling across the tablecloth. The liquid spread like blood, soaking into the white fabric. "Damn it," Emily muttered, grabbing a napkin to blot the mess. Her hands were clumsy, her breathing uneven. Ethan stood to help, but Lily beat him to it, grabbing a handful of napkins and pressing them into the spill. "It's okay, Mom," Lily said, her voice small but earnest. "It's just water." Emily nodded, but her eyes were distant, her movements frantic. She mopped up the spill with quick, jerky motions, as if erasing it could erase whatever was gnawing at her. Sophie wailed again, louder this time, her cries echoing through the house. Emily dropped the napkin and scooped the baby out of the high chair, holding her close. "Shh, shh. It's okay, baby," she murmured, but her voice cracked, and her eyes darted to the window again. Ethan followed her gaze, his brow furrowing. "What's out there, Mom?" he asked, his voice low, almost accusatory. "Nothing," Emily said too quickly. "Just the wind. It's getting dark out there." She rocked Sophie, who was still whimpering, her tiny hands clutching at her mother's blouse. The baby's eyes were wide, fixed on the window, and for a moment, the room felt suffocatingly small, the air thick with unspoken dread. Lily stood, her plate forgotten, and moved to the window. She reached for the curtain, her fingers brushing the fabric. "Can I open it? It's so stuffy in here." "No." Emily's voice was sharp, almost a shout. Lily froze, her hand dropping to her side. Emily softened immediately, her face crumpling. "I mean, it's fine, honey. Just leave it closed, okay? It's getting late." Lily nodded, but her eyes were wide, her lips trembling. Ethan stood now, his chair scraping as he moved toward the window. "I'll check," he said, his voice firm, but there was a tremor in it. He pulled the curtain back just enough to peer outside. The street was empty, the streetlights flickering faintly, but for a moment he thought he saw something, a shadow, maybe moving at the edge of the neighbor's hedge. He blinked, and it was gone. "Nothing," he said, letting the curtain fall, but his heart was pounding and he didn't sit back down. Emily stood, still holding Sophie, who had finally quieted. "Let's clean up," she said, her voice artificially bright. "Lily, help me with the dishes." "Ethan, take the trash out." Ethan opened his mouth to argue but thought better of it. He grabbed the trash bag from the kitchen and headed for the back door, his sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. The back porch light was off, and when he flipped the switch, nothing happened. He frowned, peering into the darkness beyond the door. The backyard was a void, the shapes of the swing set and garden shed barely visible in the moonlight. He hesitated, the trash bag heavy in his hand, then stepped outside. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain. Ethan moved quickly, tossing the bag into the bin and turning back toward the house. That's when he heard it, a soft rustle, like leaves brushing against each other,
coming from the side of the house. He froze, his breath catching. "Hello," he called, his voice barely above a whisper. No answer. The rustle came again, closer this time. He backed toward the door, his hand fumbling for the knob. Inside, Emily was stacking plates in the sink, her movements hurried. Lily stood beside her, drying a glass with a dish towel. Sophie was back in her high chair, chewing on a teething ring, her eyes still fixed on the window. The house was quiet now, too quiet, the kind of silence that felt like it was holding its breath. Then the lights flickered, once, twice, then out complete. The room plunged into darkness, and Sophie's teething ring hit the floor with a soft clatter. Lily gasped, dropping the glass, which shattered on the tile. Emily's breath hitched, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "Mom," Lily's voice was small, trembling. "It's okay," Emily whispered, but her voice was barely audible. She reached for her phone, fumbling to turn on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating Sophie's wide, unblinking eyes. The baby wasn't crying anymore. She was staring at the back door, where Ethan had just returned, his face pale. "Mom," he said, his voice shaking. "There's someone outside." And then from somewhere in the house, a soft, deliberate knock echoed through the darkness.
The clock on Emily's nightstand glowed 3:12 a.m., its red digits cutting through the darkness of the bedroom. She jolted awake, her heart pounding, the remnants of a nightmare clinging to her like damp. In the dream, she'd been running through a house that wasn't hers, corridors twisting endlessly, a faceless figure trailing her, whispering something she couldn't quite hear. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she sat up, the sheets tangled around her legs. The room was still, the only sound the faint creak of the house settling, and John's steady breathing beside her. But something felt wrong, like the air itself was holding its breath. Then it came, a soft, deliberate knock from downstairs, not loud, not urgent, but persistent, like a finger tapping a rhythm against wood. Emily froze, her eyes darting to the bedroom door, which stood slightly ajar. She listened, straining to hear over the thud of her own pulse. Another knock, softer this time, coming from the back door in the kitchen. She glanced at John, who hadn't stirred, his face slack in sleep, one arm flung across the pillow. She wanted to shake him awake, to tell him to listen, but her body wouldn't move. The knock came again, 3 slow taps, and her stomach twisted. Sliding out of bed, she grabbed her robe from the chair, her bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. The house was dark, the power outage from earlier leaving only the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the curtain. She crept to the doorway, pausing to check on Sophie's crib in the corner. The baby was asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling, one chubby hand curled around a stuffed rabbit. Emily's relief was fleeting. The knocking hadn't stopped. She moved into the hallway, her robe trailing behind her like a ghost. The stairs creaked under her weight as she descended, each step amplifying the sound of the knocking. It was louder now, unmistakable, coming from the back door. She hesitated at the bottom of the stairs, her hand gripping the banister. The kitchen was just beyond the living room, its doorway a black rectangle in the dim light. She wanted to call out, to demand who was there, but her throat was dry, her voice Instead she moved forward, her footsteps silent on the carpet, her eyes scanning the shadows for movement. In the kitchen the knocking stopped abruptly, as if whoever was there knew she'd arrived. The back door loomed ahead, its glass panel reflecting the faint outline of her face. She approached slowly, her breath hitching as she peered through the glass. The backyard was a void, the swing set and shed barely discernible in the darkness. No one was there, no shadow, no figure, nothing but the silence felt alive, watching. She reached for the doorknob, her fingers brushing the cold metal, then pulled back. The lock was still engaged, the deadbolt untouched. She exhaled, her shoulders sagging, but the unease didn't leave her. "Mom." Ethan's voice made her jump, her hand flying to her chest. He stood in the doorway, his hoodie rumpled, his hair sticking up from sleep. His eyes were wide, alert, holding none of the usual teenage apathy. "What's going on?" "I heard something." "It's nothing," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just the wind made." But she didn't believe it, and neither did he. Ethan stepped into the kitchen, his gaze flicking to the back door. "I'll check the windows," he said, moving before she could stop him. He crossed to the living room, pulling back the curtains with quick, jerky motion. The street outside was empty, the neighbors' hedges still, the streetlights casting long, unmoving shadows. He moved to the front door, checking the lock, then to the side windows, his movements methodical but Emily followed, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, watching her son's silhouette against the moonlight. "Everything's locked," Ethan said finally, turning back to her. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking, betraying the bravado. "Did you see who it was?" "No," Emily admitted, her eyes drifting back to the kitchen. "It stopped when I got downstairs." She wanted to say more, to tell him about the nightmare, the dread pooling in her gut, but she didn't. Instead, she forced a smile. "Go back to bed, Ethan. It's late." He hesitated, his jaw tightening, but he nodded and headed for the stairs. Emily waited until his footsteps faded, then turned back to the back door. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the glass, half expecting the knocking to start again. It did. The house was silent, oppressively so, and she felt the weight of it pressing against her chest. She checked the lock one more time, her fingers lingering on the deadbolt, then turned and headed upstairs. By morning, the Williams house was a The sun rose over Maple Lane, casting a soft glow on the row of houses, but number 17 stood eerily still. The curtains were drawn, the front door closed, the car still in the driveway. No one emerged to grab the newspaper. No kids ran out to catch the school bus. The neighbors noticed first. Miss Henderson, who walked her terrier every morning, paused by the mailbox, frowning at the untouched newspaper on the lawn. She'd seen the lights go out the night before, along with the rest of the block, but they'd come back on by dawn. The Williams house, though, remained. By noon, the unease had spread. Mr. Carter, who lived across the street, mentioned the strange silence to his wife, who called Emily's phone and got no answer. By 2 o'clock, the smell hit, a faint, sour odor wafting from the house, noticeable only when the wind shifted. Miss Henderson called the police, her voice trembling as she reported her concerns. "It's not like them," she said. "Emily always waves, and the kids are always outside. Something's wrong." 2 officers arrived within the hour, their cruiser pulling up to the curb. Officer Daniels, a stocky man with a decade on the force, approached the front door, his partner, Officer Ramirez, trailing behind. They knocked, called out, got no response. The smell was stronger now, unmistakable. A sickly mix of decay and something metallic. Daniels tried the door. It was locked. Ramirez circled to the back, peering through the kitchen window. "Nothing," she called, but her voice was tight. They forced the door open, the lock giving way with a splintered crack. Inside, the house was silent, the air thick with the stench of death. The officers moved cautiously, their hands on their holsters, their footsteps echoing in the stillness. The living room was untouched, the dining table still set with last night's dishes, a half-eaten chicken congealing in the center. Daniels called out again, his voice bouncing off the wall. No answer. They climbed the stairs, the smell growing stronger, more oppressive. In the master bedroom, they found Sophie. The baby was in her crib, her face red from crying, her tiny hands clutching the bars. She was unharmed, her onesie rumpled but clean, her stuffed rabbit on the floor. Ramirez scooped her up, murmuring softly,
while Daniels radioed for backup. "We've got a live one," he said, his voice steady but his eyes wide. "Infant upstairs, no sign of the family. They found them in the basement." The door was at the end of the hallway, slightly ajar, the smell overwhelming now. Daniels descended first, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The power still off in this part of the house. The beam landed on 4 bodies, arranged in a neat row against the concrete wall. John, Emily, Ethan and Lily, their hands bound behind their backs, their throats slit with surgical precision. Blood pooled beneath them, dark and sticky, the walls splattered with arcs of crimson. Daniels gagged, turning away, his hand over his mouth. Ramirez joined him, her face pale, her jaw clenched. "Jesus," she whispered, crossing herself. The scene was methodical, deliberate. No signs of a struggle, no fingerprints, no weapons left behind. The basement door had been locked from the inside, the key still in the lock. Upstairs, Sophie's cries echoed through the house, a haunting counterpoint to the silence below. Ramirez carried the baby outside, handing her to a paramedic as more officers arrived. Daniels stayed in the basement, his flashlight sweeping the rooms, searching for answers that weren't there. They found the dog in the upstairs bathroom, its body submerged in the bathtub, its fur matted with water. The sight was almost as jarring as the basement, a cruel afterthought to the slaughter below. But it was Sophie's onesie that stopped them cold. As the paramedic checked her over, they noticed a bloody handprint on the fabric, stark against the pale blue cotton. It was small, deliberate, not smeared but pressed, like a signature. Later, the lab would confirm it didn't match any of the victims or anyone in the house. By evening, Maple Lane was a circus of flashing lights and yellow tape. Neighbors gathered on their lawns, whispering, crying, speculating. The police cordoned off the house, their faces grim as they carried out the body. Sophie was taken to a hospital, her cries fading as the ambulance pulled away. The knocking at 3:12 a.m. was the last anyone had heard from the Williams family, and somewhere, in the shadows of that quiet suburban street, the truth was already slipping away.
The basement door creaked as Detective Mark Hensley pushed it open, his flashlight beam slicing through the inky darkness. The air was thick, heavy with the metallic tang of blood and the sour reek of decay. He'd seen death before. 20 years on the force had a way of hardening you, but nothing like this. His stomach churned as he descended the concrete steps, each one amplifying the smell until it was a physical weight pressing against his chest. Behind him, Officer Ramirez lingered at the threshold, her radio crackling faintly, her face pale from the glimpse she'd already caught. "Stay sharp," Hensley muttered, more to himself than to her, as his beam landed on the seat. 4 bodies lay in a precise row against the far wall, their silhouettes stark against the blood-streaked concrete. John Williams, Emily, Ethan, and Lily, their hands bound behind their backs with zip ties, their throats opened with clean surgical cuts. The blood had pooled beneath them, thick and dark, the edges already drying into a crust. The wounds were identical, deep, deliberate, no hesitation marks. Whoever did this wasn't just practiced, they were an artist. Hensley's flashlight lingered on Emily's face, her green eyes wide and glassy, her mouth slightly open as if she'd tried to scream. John's head lolled to one side, his expression blank, almost peaceful. Ethan and Lily were slumped together, their shoulders touching as if they'd leaned into each other in their final moments. Hensley swallowed hard, his throat tight, and turned away, his stomach lurching. He stumbled toward the corner, vomiting into a rusted drain, the sound echoing in the silent basement. Ramirez appeared at his side, her hand on his shoulder, her own face green. "You okay, Mark?" she asked, her voice low, unsteady. "No one's okay after this," he rasped, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He straightened, forcing himself to look again to catalog the details his training demanded. No footprints in the blood, no smudges, no signs of a struggle. The zip ties were standard, black, the kind you could buy at any hardware store. The killer hadn't left a single hair, fiber or print. The basement door had been locked from the inside, key still in the lock, taunting them. It was as if the killer had vanished into the wall. 4 bodies, no murder weapon, no forced entry, Hensley said, his voice steadying as he slipped into detective mode. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was planned. He stepped closer, careful not to disturb the blood, and crouched beside Ethan. The boy's phone was still in his pocket, untouched. Hensley's gloved hand retrieved it. The screen cracked but functional. No recent calls, no texts, just a half-finished game of Sudoku, frozen on the screen. They didn't even fight, he murmured, almost to himself. How do you kill 4 people without a fight? Ramirez shook her head, her eyes fixed on Lily's small form. They were tied up first. Drugged maybe. We'll need the tox reports. She paused, her voice dropping. What kind of monster does this to a kid? Hensley didn't answer. He stood, his flashlight sweeping the room. The basement was unfinished. A concrete box, with exposed pipes and a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, useless without power. A stack of moving boxes sat in one corner, labeled Christmas and books in Emily's neat handwriting. A washer and dryer stood against the opposite wall, a basket of folded laundry untouched. Everything was ordinary, mundane except for the blood and the bodies. Upstairs the house was a frozen snapshot of normalcy. The dining room table still held last night's dishes, the chicken now swarmed by flies. The living room was tidy, the couch cushions slightly askew, as if someone had sat there recently. Hensley's team had already swept the main floor, finding nothing out of place. No broken windows, no jimmied locks. The front and back doors were secure, the windows latched. Whoever did this had been let in, or they'd had a key. The thought made Hensley's skin crawl. They'd found the family dog, a golden retriever named Max, in the upstairs bathroom, its body submerged in the bathtub. The water was murky, the dog's fur matted, its eyes open and staring. Ramirez had gagged at the sight, turning away as Hensley drained the tub. Why the dog? She'd asked, her voice shaking. What kind of sick bastard drowns a dog? To keep it quiet, Hensley had said, but even he wasn't sure. The dog's death felt like an afterthought, a loose end, tied up with the same cold efficiency as the murder. But it was the baby that haunted him most. Sophie, found crying in her crib upstairs, unharmed but alone, her tiny body wrapped in a onesie stained with a bloody handprint. The print was small, deliberate, pressed into the fabric like a brand. It didn't match any of the victims, didn't match anyone in the house. The lab was running it through every database, but Hensley had a sinking feeling it wouldn't turn up anything. This killer was too careful. Back in the basement, the crime scene techs arrived, their cameras flashing like lightning in the dim space. Hensley stepped back, letting them work, his mind racing. He'd seen executions before, gang hits, revenge killings, but this was different. This was personal, methodical, almost ritualistic. The killer had taken their time, arranging the bodies, locking the door behind them. They'd wanted the scene to be found like this, a tableau of death meant to shock and confuse. Ramirez joined him, her notepad in hand, her face still pale but composed. Neighbors didn't see anything, she said, flipping through her notes. Mrs. Henderson said she heard the baby crying around 4 a.m., but didn't think much of it. Power was out for the whole block, until no one saw anyone come or go. Hensley nodded, his eyes on the bodies. No forced entry, no witnesses, no prints. This guy's a ghost. He paused, his gaze lingering on Emily's bound hands. But he wanted us to find the baby. Why leave her alive? Ramirez shook her head. Maybe he's got a conscience, or maybe she just wasn't a threat. Hensley didn't buy it. A killer this precise didn't leave loose ends out of sentiment. There was a reason Sophie was spared, and it wasn't kindness. He crouched again, studying the zip tie. They were tight, cutting into the skin, but there were no bruises, no signs of resistance. They were unconscious, he said almost to himself. Drugged, like you said. He tied them up, lined them up, then cut their throats. No mess, no panic. Ramirez frowned, but the baby's handprint, its fresh mark. He touched her after. Hensley's jaw tightened. Yeah, he wanted us to know he was there. He stood, his flashlight sweeping the room one last time. Something caught his eye, a faint scratch on the concrete, near John's body, barely visible in the dim light.
He crouched again, tracing it with his gloved finger. It wasn't random. It was a symbol, a small deliberate crescent moon, carved into the floor. He called over a tech, who photographed it, but Hensley knew it wouldn't lead anywhere. This killer was playing with. Upstairs, the house was crawling with officers now, the air buzzing with radios and hushed conversations. The paramedics had taken Sophie to the hospital, and the coroner was preparing to move the bodies. Hensley stood in the kitchen, staring at the back door, where Emily had heard the knocking. The glass was clean, the lock untouched, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the answer was here, staring him in the face. He opened the door, stepping onto the back porch, the cool morning air a sharp contrast to the stifling basement. The backyard was quiet, the swing set still, the grass damp with dew. Nothing out of place, nothing to suggest a killer had slipped through. Ramirez joined him, her arms crossed. "What are we dealing with, Mark? This isn't a random psycho." "No," Hensley said, his voice low. "This is someone who knows exactly what they're doing, someone who's done it before." He turned back to the house, his eyes on the dark rectangle of the basement door. "And they're not done." The techs called him back inside, their voices. They'd found something in the laundry basket upstairs, a single black glove, tucked beneath a folded towel. It was leather, worn but clean, no blood, no prints. Hensley held it up, his mind raced. It didn't belong to the family. It was too large for Emily or John, too pristine for a teenager's wardrobe. It was the killer's, left behind deliberately. Another taunt. He bagged it, his hands steady but his mind spinning. As the coroner's van pulled up, Hensley stood in the living room, watching the neighbors gather beyond the yellow tape. Their faces were a mix of shock and fear, their whispers carrying across the lawn. Maple Lane would never be the same. And somewhere, in the back of Hensley's mind, a single thought took root. The bloody handprint on Sophie's onesie wasn't just a signature, it was a message, and they had no idea what it meant.
Detective Mark Hensley stood in the Williams master bedroom, the faint hum of the crime scene tech's equipment filtering up from the basement. The room was a time capsule of domesticity. A queen-sized bed with a rumpled quilt, a nightstand cluttered with a half-read novel, and a bottle of hand lotion. A crib in the corner where Sophie had been found. The air still carried the faint scent of Emily's lavender perfume, a cruel contrast to the stench of death that lingered in the house. Hensley's eyes scanned the room, searching for something, anything that could explain the slaughter below. The bloody handprint on Sophie's onesie haunted him, a deliberate mark that felt like a challenge. This wasn't just a crime scene, it was a puzzle, and the killer had left pieces for them to find. Ramirez entered, her boots muffled on the carpet, holding a tablet with the preliminary crime scene report. "Coroner's initial findings are in," she said, her voice low. "No drugs in the blood, no sedatives. They were conscious when they were tied up." She paused, her jaw tightening. Emily had defensive wounds on her hands. She fought even if it didn't do any good. Hensley nodded, his gaze fixed on the bed. "So they weren't drugged." He subdued them some other way. "Fast, clean, no noise." He crouched, peering under the bed, his flashlight beam cutting through the dust. Something glinted in the shadows, a metallic edge, barely visible against the floorboards. "Ramirez over here." She joined him, her breath catching as he reached under and pulled out a small metal lockbox, its surface scratched but intact. It was heavy, the kind used for important documents or valuables, with a combination lock that looked untouched. Hensley set it on the bed, his gloved hands working carefully. "No dust on it," he noted. "This was placed here recently." Ramirez raised an eyebrow. "You think the killer left it?" "Maybe," Hensley said, his fingers tracing the lock. "Or the family was hiding something." He called over a tech, who photographed the box before attempting to open it. The combination didn't budge, and after a few tries, they pried it open with a crowbar, the hinges groaning as the lid popped free. Inside was a stack of letters, yellowed and creased, bound with a rubber band. Beneath them were a few Polaroids, their colors faded, but the images clear enough to make Hensley's stomach turn. The photos showed a younger Emily, maybe late 20s, standing outside a nondescript building, with a man whose face was scratched out, the marks violent and deliberate. In one photo Emily was smiling, unaware of the danger that seemed to lurk in the blurred background, a shadowy figure too vague to identify. The letters were handwritten, the ink smudged in places, as if they'd been read and reread countless times. Hensley unfolded the top letter, his eyes scanning the shaky script. It was dated 3 weeks ago in Emily's handwriting. The words hit like a punch. "If you're reading this, we're already dead. He found us again. I thought we'd escaped, but he's never stopped watching. John doesn't believe me. Says it's in my head, but I know it's him. The man from the case, the one they said was dead. He's not. He never was. If you find this, look into the Archer file. It's the only way to stop him." Hensley's pulse quickened. "The Archer file," he said, handing the letter to Ramirez. "Mean anything to you?" She shook her head, her eyes wide as she read. "No, but Emily worked as a forensic analyst before she had kids. FBI, I think, out of Quantico. Maybe it's from one of her old cases." Hensley nodded, his mind racing. Emily's past wasn't in the initial background check. They'd focused on John, assuming he was the likely target given his construction business and occasional debts. But this letter shifted everything. "Get someone to pull her employment records," he said, "and cross-reference anything called Archer in the FBI database. If she was hiding this, it's because she knew something dangerous." Ramirez pocketed the letter, her expression grim. "You think she was the target?" "Has to be," Hensley said, flipping through the other letter. Most were older, some dating back 15 years. Written in a different hand, angry, scrawled notes demanding Emily keep quiet or stop digging. One mentioned a name, Richard Archer, but it was scratched out, the paper torn where the pen had dug too deep. She knew something about this guy, and he came back to silence her. The techs were combing the rest of the room now, lifting fingerprints from the nightstand, bagging the Polaroids for analysis. Hensley moved to the floorboards near the bed, his flashlight sweeping the wood. A faint scratch caught his eye, similar to the crescent moon in the basement. He pressed on the board, and it gave slightly a hollow thud echoing beneath. "Ramirez helped me with this." They pried up the floorboard, revealing a small cavity beneath. Inside was a single USB drive, unmarked, wrapped in a plastic bag. Hensley held it up, the weight of it feeling heavier than it should. Whatever's on this, she didn't want anyone finding it. Back at the station, Hensley plugged the USB into a secure laptop, Ramirez hovering over his shoulder. The drive contained a single folder labeled Archer. Inside were scanned documents, grainy photos, and a few audio files. The documents were case notes from 2010, detailing an FBI investigation into a series of murders in Virginia. The suspect, Richard Archer, was a former military contractor turned hitman, linked to 5 killings with the same MO families executed, throats slit, no fingerprints, no forced entry. Babies were always spared, left crying in their cribs. The case went cold when Archer supposedly died in a car accident, his body burned beyond recognition. Emily's notes, however, were adamant. "He's not dead. He's still out there." The photos showed crime scenes eerily similar to the Williams basement. Bodies lined up, blood pooling the same surgical precision. One audio file was a recording of Emily's voice, shaky but resolute, dated 2 months ago. "If anything happens to us, it's him, Richard Archer. I saw him at the gas station last week, watching me. He knows I know. I tried to tell John, but he thinks I'm paranoid. I'm not. He's coming." Hensley leaned back, his mind spinning. She was tracking him, he said. All these years she never let it go. Ramirez frowned, scrolling through the documents. Why didn't she go to the FBI? If she had proof, why hide it under the floor? Fear, Hensley said simply. She knew what he was capable of, and she was right. He clicked on another file, a grainy surveillance still from a gas station. It showed Emily at the pump, unaware of a man in a dark jacket standing near the edge of the frame. His face was obscured, but his posture was deliberate,
Predatory. Hensley's gut twist. That's him, he said, pointing. Same build as the figure in the neighbor's footage. The neighbor's camera, a blurry feed from across the street, had caught a man entering the Williams house at 2:47 a.m., his face hidden by a reflective mask. It wasn't much, but it was enough to confirm Emily's fears. This wasn't a random killing, it was a reckoning. Hensley pulled up the Archer file on the FBI database, his clearance barely high enough to access. The official report confirmed Archer's death in 2010, but Emily's notes suggested the body was a decoy. The DNA inconclusive. She'd been one of the analysts on the case, tasked with processing evidence, and she'd seen something that convinced her Archer was alive. A detail the FBI had dismissed. Get me everything on Richard Archer, Hensley told Ramirez. Military records, associates, anything, and check if Emily had contact with anyone from that old case. He paused, his eyes on the USB. She knew he was coming for her. That's why she hid this. By evening the station was a hive of activity. Officers pulling records, cross-referencing names. The USB had yielded one more clue. A list of addresses, 3 of which matched other unsolved family murders over the past decade. All with the same babies spared, throats slit, no traces left. Hensley spread the files across his desk. The pattern undeniable. He's been at this for years, he said, his voice low, and Emily was the one who got too close. Ramirez looked up from her laptop, her face pale. Found something. Emily emailed a former colleague at Quantico 6 months ago, asking about Archer. The colleague brushed her off, said the case was closed. But get this, 2 weeks later, that colleague died in a hit and run. No witnesses. Hensley's blood ran cold. He's cleaning house. Anyone who knows anything about him, he takes out. He stood, pacing the small office. We need to find this guy before he hits again, and we need to know why he leaves the babies. The station's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the wall. Outside, night had fallen, and Maple Lane was quiet. The crime scene tape fluttering in the breeze, the lockbox, the letters, the USB. They were pieces of a puzzle Emily had died trying to solve, and somewhere out in the dark, the man who'd killed her was already planning his next move.
Detective Mark Hensley sat at his cluttered desk in the precinct, the glow of his laptop screen casting shadows across his face. The station was quiet, the late hour thinning the usual bustle to a few officers typing reports or sipping cold coffee. The Williams case files were spread out before him, a grim mosaic of photos, autopsy reports, and Emily's cryptic notes from the lockbox. The USB drive's contents had kept him up for 2 nights straight, the words "he's not dead" looping in his mind like a mantra. The neighbor's blurry camera footage, time-stamped 2:47 a.m., sat open on his screen, paused on the grainy image of a man in a reflective mask slipping into the Williams house. The mask was featureless, a smooth, mirrored surface that gave nothing away, but it was the way the figure moved, deliberate, unhurried, that made Hensley's skin crawl. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes, the weight of the case pressing against his temples. Emily's letter had pointed them to Richard Archer, a ghost from a 2010 FBI case, a hitman supposedly killed in a fiery car crash. But her notes, her photos, her recorded voice, they all screamed otherwise. And now the neighbor's footage confirmed it. Someone was out there, moving through the shadows, leaving bodies and babies in his wake. Hensley clicked play again, watching the figure glide across the lawn, disappearing into the house like smoke. The mask wasn't just a disguise, it was a statement. This killer wanted to be seen, but not known. Ramirez burst into the office, her coat still damp from the rain outside. "Got something," she said, tossing a file onto the desk. "Neighbor's camera across the street. Mr. Carter's. He upgraded it last year, better resolution than we thought. Tex cleaned up the footage. It's still blurry, but look." She opened her tablet, pulling up a still image. The man in the reflective mask was clearer now, his silhouette sharp against the dark lawn. The mask caught the streetlight, glinting like a warped mirror, but it was his hands that caught Hensley's attention, gloved, one holding a small object, maybe a tool or a key. That's how he got in, Hensley said, leaning closer. No forced entry because he didn't need to break anything. He tapped the screen. Run that object through the database. Could be a lockpick, maybe custom. Ramirez nodded, already typing. There's more. I dug into the Archer file, cross-referenced it with other cases like Emily's notes suggested. Found a hit. 2013, small town in Ohio. Family of 4, same memo, throat slit. No prints, baby left alive in the crib. Local PD caught a glimpse of a suspect on a gas station camera 2 miles away. Guess what? Guy was wearing a reflective mask. Hensley's pulse quickened. Same guy. Has to be, Ramirez said. The Ohio case went cold. No leads. But I tracked down a survivor, not from that family but from a similar case in 2015 West Virginia. Woman named Clara Tate. She was 8 when her family was killed. Same way she hid in a closet. Saw the killer. She's alive. Lives in Pittsburgh now. I got her on the phone. Hensley sat up, his exhaustion forgotten. What'd she say? Ramirez's face darkened. She was shaky, didn't want to talk at first, said she still has nightmares, but she remembered something, said the killer was humming a lullaby while he worked. Something about hush little baby. She couldn't see his face. Said it was like a mirror reflecting the room back at her. She's certain he knew she was there but let her live. A lullaby, Hensley repeated, his mind flashing to Sophie, the sole survivor of the Williams house. Her bloody handprint onesie now locked in evidence. He's got a pattern, spares the kids, leaves them as witnesses maybe. But why? Ramirez shook her head. Clara said he didn't speak, just hummed, moved like he had all the time in the world. She said it felt like he was performing, like he wanted someone to see. She paused, her voice dropping. She called him the man with no face. Hensley leaned back, the nickname sinking in. The man with no face. It fit the reflective mask, the lack of prints, the ghost-like precision. He pulled up the Ohio case file on his laptop, scanning the details. The family's bodies were arranged just like the Williams, the baby unharmed, a bloody handprint on the crib's railing. The West Virginia case was the same, down to the crescent moon scratched into the floor. He's been doing this for years, Hensley said. At least since 2010, maybe longer, and Emily knew. Ramirez nodded, flipping through her FBI file confirms she was on the Archer case in 2010. She was the one who flagged inconsistencies in the car crash report. Dental records didn't fully match. DNA was partial. She pushed for a deeper investigation, but the higher-ups shut it down, said it was a waste of resources. She quit a year later, moved here with John. She never stopped looking, Hensley said, glancing at the USB drive on his desk. She was building a case against him, even after she left the bureau. That's why he came for. Ramirez's phone buzzed and she glanced at it, her eyes narrowing. Tex got a hit on the gas station footage from the Williams case. The guy in the dark jacket, the one watching Emily. They enhanced the image. He's wearing the same reflective mask, caught in the reflection of the car window. It's subtle, but it's there. Hensley's heart sank. The killer hadn't just been watching Emily. He'd been stalking her, planning this for days, maybe weeks. He pulled up the gas station still, the timestamp 3 days before the murders. The man stood at the edge of the frame, his posture relaxed, almost casual, but the mask's glint was unmistakable. He wanted her to know he was coming. Hensley said, this wasn't just about silencing her, it was personal. Ramirez leaned against the desk, her arms crossed. So what's his deal? Why the mask? Why the lullabies? And why leave the kids alive? Hensley shook his head, his mind racing through the pieces. The mask is control. He's hiding, but he's also showing off, making sure we know he's untouchable. The lullabies, maybe it's psychological, keeps him calm, or maybe it's part of the ritual. The kids, though, he trailed off, his eyes on the Ohio case file. They're not a threat. They can't identify him. Not really, but they're a message. He's telling us he can do this again, and we can't stop him. Ramirez's phone buzzed again, this time with a call. She answered,
her face tightening as she listened. "Yeah. Send it over," she said, then hung up. "Clara Tate just emailed me. She drew a sketch of what she saw in that closet in 2015. It's not much, but she's adamant about the mask and the humming. Said it's been the same in every nightmare since." The email arrived, and Hensley opened the attachment. The sketch was rough, drawn by an unsteady hand, but chilling in its clarity. A faceless figure in a dark coat, the reflective mask, a blank oval catching the light. A crescent moon scratched into the floor beside a row of bodies. Clara's note was brief. He hummed the whole time. "Hush. Little baby, don't say a word. I'll never forget it." Hensley's stomach twisted. "Get Clara on a plane," he said. "We need her here. Need to know everything she saw, and pull every case with a reflective mask. Or a lullaby. This guy's got a signature and we're missing something." Ramirez nodded, already typing. "What about the Archer angle? If Emily was right, he's not dead, but why come after her now? After all these years?" Hensley stared at the neighbor's footage. The masked figure, frozen on his screen. Maybe she found something new, something that could expose him. That USB. She didn't just keep it for nostalgia, she was building a case. Maybe getting close to proving he's alive. The precinct's fluorescent lights flickered, casting long shadows across the room. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the city quiet, the kind of quiet that felt like it was waiting for something to break. Hensley's eyes drifted to the Williams case photos, Emily's lifeless face staring back at him. She'd known the man with no face was coming, had spent years looking over her shoulder, hiding evidence under floorboards, and now her family was dead, her baby marked with a bloody handprint, and the killer was still out there, humming his lullaby. Hensley stood, grabbing his coat. "I'm going back to the house," he said. "There's something we're missing, something he left behind." Ramirez frowned. "It's been swept 3 times, Mark. What do you expect to find?" "I don't know," he admitted, his voice low. "But he's playing with us. That glove, that handprint, the crescent moon, he's leaving breadcrumbs, and I'm not letting him disappear again." As he headed for the door, the sketch of the masked man lingered in his mind, the lullaby echoing like a warning. The man with no face wasn't just a killer. He was a shadow slipping through the cracks of every case, and Hensley was starting to realize he'd been hunting him for longer than he knew.
Detective Mark Hensley stood in the Williams basement, the air still heavy with the ghost of blood and decay. Though the bodies had been removed days ago, the crime scene tape fluttered at the top of the stairs, and the faint hum of a generator powering work lights filled the space. He'd returned to the house alone, driven by a gnawing certainty that the man with no face had left something behind, a clue, a taunt, something to unravel the puzzle of the Williams family's slaughter. The crescent moon scratched into the concrete floor glinted under the lights, mocking him. He crouched, tracing it with a gloved finger, its edges too precise to be accidental. This wasn't just a signature, it was a challenge, a marker of a killer who knew he'd be back. Upstairs, the house was a hollow shell, the furniture tagged and photographed, the family's belongings catalogued like relics. Sophie, the baby, was with social services, her bloody handprint onesie locked in evidence. Hensley's mind kept circling back to Emily's letter. He found us again. The Archer file, the USB drive, the gas station footage. It all pointed to Richard Archer, a man the FBI swore was dead. But Emily had known better, and it had cost her everything. Hensley's phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was Ramirez, her voice tight with urgency. "Mark, you need to see this. We got the autopsy reports back, and Clara Tate just landed. She's at the station." "I'm on my way," Hensley said, his eyes lingering on the crescent moon. He took one last look around the basement, the walls still stained with faint traces of blood, then climbed the stairs, the weight of the case pressing harder with every step. At the precinct, Ramirez was waiting in the briefing room, the autopsy reports spread across the table like a grim deck of cards. Clara Tate sat in a corner, a thin woman in her late teens, her dark hair pulled back, her hands twisting a tissue into her eyes were haunted, darting to the door every few seconds, as if expecting the man with no face to walk through. Hensley nodded to her, keeping his distance. She looked like she'd bolt if he got too close, then turned to Ramirez. "What's the reports?" Ramirez pushed a file toward him, her face grim. Emily was tortured before she died. Bruises on her arms, shallow cuts on her thighs, signs of restraint beyond the zip ties. She was alive for at least an hour after the others were killed. John, Ethan and Lily, clean cuts, instant death, no defensive wounds, no struggle. But Emily, he took his time with her. Hensley's stomach turned as he scanned the report. The coroner's notes were clinical, detached, multiple superficial lacerations, consistent with a small blade, likely inflicted to cause pain without immediate lethality. He pictured Emily bound in that basement, her family dead beside her, the killer's reflective mask glinting as he worked. He wanted something from her, Hensley said, his voice low. Information maybe, something she knew from the Archer case. Ramirez nodded, flipping to another page. "There's more. The coroner found traces of a paralytic in Emily's system. Not enough to knock her out, just enough to keep her still. He wanted her awake, Mark, wanted her to feel it." Hensley's jaw tightened, his eyes drifting to Clara, who was staring at the floor, her lips moving slightly as if whispering to herself. He approached her cautiously, crouching to her level. "Clara, I'm Detective Hensley. I know this is hard, but anything you can tell us about what you saw back then, it could help us stop him." Clara's eyes flicked up, wide and glassy. "He hummed," she said, her voice barely audible. "That lullaby, 'Hush little baby, don't say a word,' over and over, like it was stuck in his head. I was in the closet, peeking through the crack. He moved so slow, like he was dancing. The mask, it reflected everything. The blood, my mom's face. He looked right at me. I know he did, but he didn't come for me. He just left." Hensley exchanged a glance with Ramirez. "Did he say anything else? Anything besides the lullaby?" Clara shook her head, her fingers shredding the tissue. "No, just the humming. But he scratched something on the floor before he left. A moon, like a I didn't know what it meant until I saw your photos." She pointed to the crime scene images on the table. "The crescent moon etched in the Williams basement. It's him. I know it's him." Hensley nodded, his mind raced. The lullaby, the moon, the mask. They were threads connecting a string of murders across states, across years. He turned back to Ramirez. "What else do we have? Anything on the gas station footage?" Ramirez pulled up her tablet, showing a still from the enhanced footage. The man in the reflective mask stood near Emily's car, his posture relaxed but predatory, like a cat watching a bird. "We tracked the car he was driving, a black sedan, no plates, stolen from a lot in Maryland 2 weeks ago. Found it abandoned in a parking garage downtown, wiped clean. But we got a partial print off the gas pump. It's not in any database, but it matches the size of the handprint on Sophie's onesie." Hensley's pulse quickened. "So he's not as careful as he thinks." "Anything else?" "Yeah," Ramirez said, her voice dropping. "Emily's FBI file. She wasn't just an analyst on the Archer case. She was the lead on evidence processing. She flagged a discrepancy in the car crash that supposedly killed him. Found a blood sample at one of the crime scenes that didn't match any victims. Suggested it was Archer. The FBI dismissed it, said it was contaminated, but she kept a copy of the sample. It was in a private lab off the books. Guess where?" Hensley's eyes narrowed. "The lockbox." "Nope," Ramirez said. "The lab was raided 6 months ago, samples destroyed. Emily's email to her colleague mentioned she was trying to get it retested. That's when her colleague died in that hit and run." Hensley leaned back, the pieces clicking into place. She was the target, not John, not the kids. She had proof Archer was alive, or she was close to getting it. He tortured her to find out what she knew, who she told. Ramirez nodded, her eyes dark. "And he killed the family to make it look like the other, to keep the pattern, keep us chasing a serial killer instead of a hitman cleaning up loose ends." Hensley turned to Clara, who was still staring at the floor, her lips moving silently.
Clara, did you ever hear the name Richard Archer? Maybe from your parents or after? She shook her head, her voice trembling. No, but my dad was a cop. He worked with the FBI sometimes on big cases. He used to talk about a guy they could never catch. Someone who killed like it was art. He stopped talking about it after a while, said it was too dangerous. I think that's why he came for us. Hensley's mind raced. Emily, a forensic analyst. Clara's father, a cop. Both tied to the FBI. Both linked to cases that brushed against Richard Archer. He stood pacing the room. We need to dig deeper into Archer's connection. Military records. Contractors he worked with. Anyone who might have helped him fake his death. And we need to know what Emily was chasing those last few months. Ramirez's phone buzzed again, and she glanced at it, her face paling. Mark, you're not gonna believe this. Another family, 2 hours ago in Delaware. Same mellow throats, slit baby spared, crescent moon on the floor. They just found a reflective mask in the backyard, left on purpose. Hensley froze, his heart pounding. He's moving faster. He knows we're on to him. He grabbed his coat, his voice urgent. Get a team to Delaware now, and put a protective detail on Clara. If he's cleaning house, she's a loose end. Clara's head snapped up, her eyes wide with fear. He'll come for me, won't he? He always knows. Hensley met her gaze, his voice steady but cold. Not if we find him first. He turned to Ramirez. Get the FBI on the line. We need everything they've got on Archer, classified or not, and pull every surveillance camera within 10 miles of that Delaware. As Ramirez rushed to make calls, Hensley looked at the autopsy photos. Emily's tortured body staring back at him. The man with no face wasn't just killing to silence. He was killing to control, to keep a truth buried deep. And Emily had been the key, the one who'd almost cracked it open. Now with another family dead and Clara's haunted eyes watching him, Hensley felt the clock ticking. The killer was out there, humming his lullaby, his reflective mask glinting in the dark, and Hensley was running out of time to stop him.
The small, sunlit room smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender, a stark contrast to the grim chaos of the Williams house months ago. Sophie, now 2 years old, sat on a soft blue rug in her new home, a modest apartment in upstate New York, where she lived with her Aunt Karen, Emily's distant cousin. The toddler's curls bounced as she stacked colorful blocks, her laughter a bright note in the quiet space. Karen sat nearby, folding laundry, her eyes soft but shadowed, as if the weight of the tragedy still lingered. A child therapist, Dr. Ellis, knelt beside Sophie, her notepad open, her voice gentle as she guided the session. Hensley stood in the doorway, his coat slung over his arm, watching the scene with a mix of hope and dread. This was his last stop before heading back to the precinct, where the case of the man with no face remained a festering wound. Ellis smiled at Sophie, holding up a stuffed rabbit like the one found in her crib. Can you tell me about your bunny, Sophie? Does he have a name? The toddler giggled, reaching for the toy, but instead of answering she tilted her head, her blue eyes distant. Then in a voice clear and unnervingly calm for a child her age, she said, "Hush." The room froze. Karen's hands stilled on the laundry, her breath catching. Dr. Ellis's pen paused, her eyes flicking to Hensley, who felt a chill crawl up his spine. "Hush." Dr. Ellis repeated, keeping her tone light. "Is that his name?" Sophie didn't answer, just stared at the rabbit, her tiny fingers tracing its ears. Then she whispered again, "Hush," and began to hum, a soft lilting melody that Hensley recognized instantly. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word," the lullaby Clara Tate had described, the one the killer hummed as he slit throats and scratched crescent moons into floors. Hensley's heart thudded, his hand tightening on his coat. It was impossible. Sophie had been a baby when the murders happened, too young to remember, too young to know, yet here she was, humming the killer's song. Karen stood, her voice shaky. "She's never done that before. She doesn't talk much yet." She looked at Hensley, her eyes pleading for an explanation he didn't have. Dr. Ellis set the rabbit down, her expression calm but her hands trembling slightly.
Has she scribbled a note? Sophie, Hensley said, stepping forward, his voice low. Where did you hear that song? The toddler looked up at him, her eyes wide and unblinking, then pointed to the window. Man, she said simply, then went back to her blocks as if nothing had happened. Hensley followed her gaze, his pulse racing, but the window showed only the quiet street outside, a few leaves skittering across the pavement. He exchanged a glance with Dr. Ellis, who nodded slightly, signaling she'd follow up late. Karen scooped Sophie into her arms, her face pale, and Hensley knew he couldn't stay. The answers weren't here, not yet. Back at the precinct, Ramirez was waiting, her desk buried under files from the Delaware case and 2 others that had surfaced since: a family in Indiana, another in upstate Maine, both with the same MO: throat slit, babies spared, crescent moons etched into the floor. The man with no face was accelerating, his kills coming faster, as if taunting the police to catch up. Hensley dropped into his chair, his mind still on Sophie's eerie hum. Anything new? He asked, rubbing his temples. Ramirez pushed a file toward him, her face. FBI finally coughed up the full Archer file. Turns out Emily wasn't the only one who suspected he faked his death. Another analyst, guy named Paul Travers, flagged the same discrepancies in 2010. Blood samples, mismatched dental records. He was working with Emily, off the books until he vanished in Body was never found. Hensley's eyes narrowed. Another loose end, like Emily's colleague in the hit and run. Exactly, Ramirez said. And get this, the Delaware scene had a new twist. They found a note tucked into the baby's blanket, just one word, hush, written in the same ink as the letters in Emily's lockbox. Hensley leaned back, his mind racing. The lullaby, the note, Sophie's first word. It was all connected, a thread weaving through every crime scene. He's not just killing to silence people, he said. He's building something, a legend. The man with no face, the silent butcher, whatever we call him. He wants the story to spread. Ramirez nodded, pulling up a map on her tablet, red pins marking each murder site. Look at the pat. Virginia in 2010, Ohio in 2013, West Virginia in 2015. Now here, Delaware, Indiana, Maine. He's moving in a spiral, tightening toward something. But what? Hensley stared at the map, the pins forming a loose coil across the eastern U.S. He's circling back, he said, his voice low. Maybe to where it started. The Archer case began in Virginia. If he's tying up loose ends, he might be heading there. Before Ramirez could respond, her phone buzzed with an alert. She scanned it, her face paling. Mark, another one. Just reported. Small town outside Richmond, Virginia. Family of 3. Same MO. Baby's alive, crescent moon on the floor. Reflective mask left behind. They're calling him the silent butcher now. It's all over X. Hensley's stomach twisted as he grabbed his coat. Get a jet. We're going to Virginia, and put a detail on Sophie, and if he's circling back, he might come for her. The flight to Richmond was tense, the hum of the plane doing nothing to drown out the lullaby looping in Hensley's head. Ramirez sat beside him, scrolling through posts on X, where the silent butcher was trending, a mix of horror, speculation, and morbid fascination. Users shared blurry images of reflective masks, recounted rumors of a ghostly killer who spared babies, whispered lullaby. The legend was growing just as the killer wanted. At the Virginia crime scene, the house was a mirror of the Williams, a quiet suburban home now a tomb. 3 bodies, mother, father, teenage daughter, lay in the basement, their throats slit, their hands bound. The baby, a 6-month-old boy, was upstairs, unharmed, a bloody handprint on his blanket. The crescent moon was scratched into the floor, larger this time, almost defiant, and in the backyard, under a tree, sat the reflective mask, its surface catching the morning light like a cruel wing. Hensley crouched by the bodies, his flashlight tracing the wounds. Same blade, he said to Ramirez, who was photographing the scene. Same precision. He's not slipping, not even a little. Ramirez nodded, her voice low. The note was in the baby's crib again. He's taunting us, Mark. Hensley stood, his eyes on the mask outside. He walked to it, careful not to disturb the scene, and picked it up with gloved hands. It was lightweight, smooth, the reflective surface showing his own distorted. For a moment he felt the killer's presence, as if the mask itself carried his intent. "He's not just taunting us," Hensley said. "He's telling us he's untouchable." Back at the precinct, the team worked through the night, chasing leads that went nowhere. The partial print from the Delaware scene didn't match any database. The stolen sedan from the Williams case turned up in Virginia wiped clean again. Clara Tate, now under protective custody, called daily, her voice trembling as she recounted new details. Fragments of the lullaby, the way the killer's mask reflected her family's blood. Sophie's humming haunted Hensley most, a child's voice carrying the killer's song across months and miles. As dawn broke, Hensley stood at his desk staring at the map. The pins were tighter now, converging on Virginia. Emily's USB drive, still in evidence, held the key she'd been so close to exposing Archer, to proving he was alive. But the silent butcher wasn't killing for revenge. Not any. He was killing to keep the truth buried, to ensure no one dug deep enough to find him. The lullaby, the moons, the masks, they were his shield, his myth, keeping the world focused on a ghost story while he slipped away. Hensley's phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Ellis. Sophie said, "Hush again." Drew a crescent moon on her sketch pad. "Call me." He closed his eyes, the weight of it all crashing down. The silent butcher wasn't just a killer, he was a shadow, weaving himself into the lives he spared, leaving his mark in their minds, their words, their nightmares. And as the sun rose over another blood-soaked house, Hensley knew the truth. He wasn't hunting a man, he was chasing a legend, one that grew with every body left behind, and it would keep growing until the silent butcher decided it was time to disappear for good.
Detective Mark Hensley stood beneath the faint glow of streetlights outside the Richmond crime scene, the reflective mask sealed in an evidence bag hanging heavily in his hand. The silent butcher's trail had vanished into the shadows once more, his legend growing with every chilling post on X and whispered tale across the nation. Sophie's eerie hum and the crescent moons carved into blood-soaked floors haunted Hensley's thoughts, a mystery that remained unsolved. The FBI's renewed hunt for Richard Archer yielded only dead ends, the truth buried deeper with every family left in his wake. Inside the precinct, Ramirez sifted through maps and files with unwavering determination, while Clara Tate, under constant guard, sketched the nightmares that clung to her soul. Sophie, now with Karen, murmured "hush" to her toys, a toddler unknowingly carrying the killer's legacy. The man with no face had slipped away again, his lullaby echoing in the silence, a vow that he would strike when the world turned away. Hensley stepped into the cool night air, the mask's reflection catching the light like a mocking gaze. The case was paused, but the pursuit endured. The silent butcher didn't kill for vengeance, he killed to guard a secret Emily had nearly uncovered, a secret destined to remain hidden. As stars glimmered in the darkened sky, Hensley knew the truth would stay buried, forever entwined with the haunting hum of a lullaby that refused to fade. The end. If you enjoyed this gripping tale of the silent butcher, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments below, and share this story with others to keep the mystery alive. Hit that bell icon for more thrilling content, and join us on this journey into the unknown.